Thank you, Dylan. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Claire Mobley, and I'm the Director of Advocacy at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. I get the honor of introducing Sara Barz, who is a transportation planner. She has a master's degree in city and regional planning from UC Berkeley. Sara co-founded Seamless Bay Area and Slow Hearst, and she is a volunteer leader of the Safe Streets advocacy group Kids Safe SF. She currently serves as the District 7 representative on the San Francisco County Transportation Authority Community Advisory Committee. That's really long. She is also a founding board member of the West Side Family Democratic Club and has worked on the Yes on J campaign in 2022 to protect JFK Promenade in Golden Gate Park. Sara and her husband Ian live with their 2-year-old son Calvin and their 2 ginger rescue kittens in the Sunnyside neighborhood of San Francisco. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sara. Sara has 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes to introduce yourself, if I didn't capture all of it already. So Sara.
No, that's great. Thanks, Claire. Yes, I have 2 ginger rescue kittens. Now I guess they're like full-grown cats. One of them sitting on my lap. He may make an appearance, but he also loves transit. So just everybody, it's fine. So thank you so much, Claire. My name's Sara, and I'm a mom. And as Claire mentioned, I'm the current D7, District 7 representative to the SFCTA, Citizens Advisory Committee. My family leads a truly multimodal life here in San Francisco. We're Muni riders, BART riders, pedestrians, bike riders, and drivers. And if you're curious, my Muni lines are the 23, the 36, and the J Church. So for the past decade, I've worked in transportation in both the public and private sector. After completing a Fulbright research fellowship in France, I graduated from UC Berkeley in 2015 with my master's in city planning and a concentration in transportation planning. I've worked at the City of Oakland, the SFCTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and now I work with transit agencies around the world as in my current role as a product manager for transit payments at Apple. In my free time, I'm very active in my community in Sunnyside. With Friends of Slow Hearst and the Sunnyside Neighborhood Association, I organize many social and civic events annually. In fact, just last weekend, we had our 3rd annual caroling and holiday party on our slow street, Slow Hearst, which was attended by many local families and even Santa Claus. So I would like this opportunity to bring my passion for my neighborhood and my community and my professional expertise to SFMTA Board. In particular, I believe that I could help the agency staff better structure outreach and community engagement processes based on my experience in user research and also as a community advocate in Sunnyside. If appointed to the board, I have 3 top priorities. 1, solving Muni's fiscal crisis. 2, making our streets and buses safer for everyone. And then 3, building trust with the diverse communities of San Francisco. We simply need to find more effective and efficient approaches to outreach, and so that we can actually try new things and move more swiftly without significant public pushback. Since I became a parent, Safe Streets advocacy has been my focus with my volunteer time. However, while I have been an advocate, I am not an ideologue. I've worked in this field long enough to know that there are usually several possible options to a transportation problem, and community support is a critical element to any street change. So Goose here and myself would like to end by saying the city charter calls for 2 members of the SFMTA board to have professional transportation experience. And much like Amanda Eakin, I would be very honored to contribute my professional experience and expertise to the board. So thank you all for joining in today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much, Sara, for that introduction. And as a gentle reminder for folks that just joined, if you have any specific questions for Sara, please send them to questions in the chat. Okay, Sara, I'm going to kick us off with 2 questions from the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. Our first question is, by now, most people have seen the first draft of the biking and rolling plan. Whether or not they've read the 300 pages, I think most San Franciscans know that the city is working on its first official update to the bike plan in over 15 years. Can you tell us what your initial reactions are? What are your, and especially what your thoughts are about the heavy reliance on slow, calm, shared corridors? And this is a three-part question. In the first phase of the plan, what would you like to see the SFMTA focus on? Let me
Okay.
know if you need me to repeat any of that.
Okay. So can I, sorry, the first one was, what did I first think about the plan? The second one was, what do I think about the reliance on shared corridors? And the third one is where would I want the staff to start? Is that right?
Yes, in the first phase
Okay.
of the plan, what would you like to see the SFMTA focus on?
Okay, fantastic. All right. So I actually want to start with the second one first, the shared corridors. So I have a little bit of a I've actually shared this with Director Tumlin now, who's now leaving, but also with some members of SFMTA staff. I actually think the shared corridors could be great. I really do. And I think that the fact that a lot of people who are in the bicycling community feels underwhelmed by that is largely due to our lived experience with how slow streets function today. And I live on a slow street. I am like, I am one of the people who like passionately loves Slowhurst and wants to make it better and has organized to get money from the budget to put it to install speed tables on my street just to slow down the drivers, right? Like I think the problem with such a reliance on shared streets is not that is inherently bad. I think it could be great. I think lots of places in the country have done it in a really, really good way. And it's like, it can be fantastic because a lot of people, even if they don't ride a bike, want the traffic on their streets to be slow. And when you actually create meaningful traffic calming, they see that as a win and not as something that like hurts them in some way. It's just that we in San Francisco haven't seen that play out yet, right? And so I think that if the slow streets in general felt a lot calmer and genuinely slow, then I would have a very different reaction to like this reliance, especially on the west side. But I think if we could figure out how to do that effectively, I think it could be a particularly useful thing. Because as I mentioned, like if you go to Berkeley, if you go to Emerville, there's lots of places where they have very effective shared streets for people biking and people driving. And there's not a tremendous pushback. So I'd like to see the slow streets actually be slow, and that would give me a lot of confidence in the rest of the plan. So that's the second question. The third question, what would I want them to focus on first? Well, that, like, I would say what we need, one of the things we've lived over the past like decade is just seeing these bike projects take forever. And then even when they're developed, they're not always that great. I mean, we have some really wonderful sterling examples of bicycle infrastructure or infrastructure for people first, but they haven't, like I'm thinking of JFK Promenade and Golden Gate Park, but they haven't really been the result of a bike plan. So I one of the things we would really need to focus on is show me the kind of minimal network that like gets across the city that provides truly safe facilities for people biking, right? Like let's see that. Let's focus on that first. And let's do it in a quick build way. That's what I would really want to see staff do and identify what is that sort of minimum network. And then we can sort of build out like the connector routes that feed into that. Okay, and I think I forgot the first question. I'm sorry. What was the first question?
It was what are your initial reactions, which I feel like you kind of captured a bit in answering the second question.
Well, how about this? I will say I did actually, well, it's not, I would love to say I read the entire 300-page plan. I did not, but I did read the first 50 pages, which is the actual plan. And then the remainder are the appendices and like supplementary information. So I did read that. And I think two things, which I'm eager to share with you all. The first is that I think what the planning team did by creating like this sort of the squiggly areas, the special areas for that need greater focus, I
Mhm.
I actually think that that was a smart thing to do. In planning, right, there's a long tradition of you do like a general plan and then you recognize that certain areas require like more focus. And that's like you do like a special plan, right? Like for that particular area. We see that happen in lots of places. When you do a general plan update, then you have to do like these focused area plans. I think that recognizing that you need to have like greater attention, more work, you haven't had the time to do that work by the time you adopt the full, like the general plan, if you will. I think that that's actually very prudent. It's like knowing staff's limitations and what they've been able to accomplish. I would have liked to have seen a timeline by which they were looking to like finish each of those separate community plans. And I did not see that in the deck, or excuse me, in the report. And that to me was alarming and something that I would want to follow up on. I also did not see a very firm, I didn't see a very clear definition of the term community readiness, which they were really using a lot in that plan. And I think that that's a mistake. I think community readiness, when it comes to something like bicycling, actually is real. I don't think all neighborhoods in San Francisco have the same feelings about access to bicycle infrastructure. But it's not helpful to confuse community readiness and opposition. And I fear that if you're not being very crisp about what that means and how you're using a factor like community readiness, you risk just like not doing anything for fear of bothering everyone. And that I think is a huge strategic mistake. So those are
Thank
my two
you.
thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for that last point. It's actually a really great transition into this next question that I have in the last from SF Bike. So, as you know, like our city has really ambitious climate goals of 80% sustainable modes of travel by 2030. How will you support and encourage, these communities that we're talking about? We call them equity priority communities that have been historically harmed by transportation planning. And, the Bayview is a neighborhood that comes to mind. How do you encourage those neighborhoods to mode shift?
Well, I mean, I think I think that a lot of the areas where we see reluctance to change their modes, right? There are real safety issues, like real like significant concerns around traffic safety and personal safety. And then I also think that those are places that are either not well served by transit or like the transit that is there is not that reliable. And I think like the Bayview is a really good example of that. Now, I don't live in the Bayview, and I certainly do not want to present my answer as representative of the views of people who do live in the Bayview, but I had a really good conversation with Dominica Henderson last week. And a large reason why, in her view, a lot of neighborhoods in the Bayview feel like they're just not getting what they need is because the T line for, now decades remains unreliable and extremely slow. So I think acknowledging that there are real reasons why people don't want to, move to transit, move to cycling, like they need their cars because they feel like they are out of the way. Like those are real sentiments. And I think like you can't force them to do things that are not going to be rational, unfortunately. But you can do things like speed up the T, or you can do things like figure out what the path forward is for making the streets safer, right? I think the what was it, the Bayview Community Transportation Plan is actually like particularly useful bit of planning work that has like found a way to get community buy-in to make like a safer corridor for not only for people cycling, but people walking, but also just get buy-in from the community that like, yeah, we need to stop the speeding and we need like meaningful solutions to stop the sideshows, right? Like real problems that people face every day. So I think, what am I trying to say? I am a strong believer in our mode shift goals, and that the agency should work to fulfill our mode shift goals by 2030. I like a big part of the reason why I lead a multimodal life and will ride around with my kid on the back of my bicycle is because I want to be the change that I see in the world, right? Like this is very important to me. But we also need to recognize that like we have to make some improvements to like the backbone of our multimodal system, which often means improving our transit system. And that can be hard to do. And we also need to focus on our street safety, right? Like those are real problems. If people feel scared just walking around their neighborhood, that's a huge impediment to mode shift. So I would want us, the agency, to really start with those kinds of approaches, especially in these areas where we're not seeing the mode shift that we want, but that are served by transit. Like what can we do to more meaningfully help support those neighborhoods first?
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for your answers. My two questions are up, and I'm going to throw it over to Dylan for two questions from SF Transit Riders.
Thanks, Claire. First question from us is, at the Rules Committee hearing last week and in your intro today, you mentioned that your first priority on the board is to address Muni's fiscal cliff. So I wanted to ask, how do you think the agency should find the about $322 million it needs to avoid major service impacts?
Oh boy, only the easy questions. So I think that this would be my top priority as a board member, is we need to find a way to fully and sustainably fund Muni service going forward. There's a really good piece in Muni Local today about just how much the city relies on Muni and how terrible our downtown recovery would be if we let Muni falter. So like this is absolutely the top priority for the board at the moment. What I can say about Muni's funding sources is that there's a pretty significant reliance on the general fund right now, which I have to say is not usually that common for transit agencies. If you look at how agencies around the world are funded, like transit systems in major metro areas, like you'd see a larger percentage of revenue for operating funds in particular coming from state and federal sources. We don't have that. We also don't have very much coming from the regional sources either. So there's a pretty significant reliance on the general fund, and then to a much lower extent to things like parking and fares. So that creates this like dichotomy, or I wouldn't say dichotomy, but it creates a very narrow focus on a set of revenue sources that creates a lot of anger. And what I'm really afraid of in this, like frankly, like the problem that we have before us is that we become so laser focused on, we either have to raise fares or parking rate increases, or we cut service. And that becomes like only the levers and the tools that we play with. And that's really a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. Like there's no amount of service cuts that we can make that actually keeps a functioning transit system that moves like hundreds of thousands of people a day. There's also no, like, we can't increase the fares to $10. You're right. Like it doesn't work. So we have to find solutions from elsewhere. And I would be like championing, making an argument to our state legislators and our regional leaders that we need to have funding for Muni operations coming from those financial sources, and that the region and the state of California would benefit significantly from a functioning Muni system in San Francisco. So that would be like one of the ways that I very much want to try to solve this, is to broaden the pie of funding sources and make munis funding sources look more like high functioning transit systems around the world.
And if I appreciate that. I think, when you look at other states, a lot of other states do invest more in transit than we do here in California. But, assuming that money doesn't come through, how would you prioritize those local sources of funding? It's kind of the thing that, we're facing right now, and like trying to wrap our heads around is, what do we do locally if that funding from other sources doesn't come through?
Well, I do think that one of the things we learned from Proposition L is that there is a majority of San Franciscans who want to pay for muni operations, right? Like, I think that was, well, a real disappointment that it didn't pass. It didn't pass not because it didn't win a majority. It passed because of a poison pill and a rival piece of legislation. So that to me is very like an optimistic sign for the future. I'm still holding out hope for a regional measure that includes multiple counties and can meaningfully fund like a transit system that spans multiple transit operators. But at a minimum, I do see a path towards a local ballot measure to also fund transit operations. And I think that there would be likely the support to do it.
Got it. And my second question is around kind of that regional framework. So you're one of the co-founders of Seamless Bay Area, which is an organization we work with that is a regional transportation advocacy group. So I wanted to ask, I guess, two parts. First, what is your vision for the SFMTA as it relates to regional transit? And then the second part is, how would you balance that vision with the local needs, especially if those two are ever at odds with each other?
Okay. So I think yes, let me take a step back. So yes, I am a co-founder of Seamless Bay Area, and I was one of the co-founders of Seamless Bay Area in part because I did my graduate thesis with Spur. I helped write the piece, or rather the Spur report, Seamless Transit, how to make the Bay Area feel like an easy to use rational system. And I did that. I was really interested in that work because of my experience living in Paris. So the year that I did my Fulbright fellowship in Paris, I was there to study bike share systems, how bike share systems work. At the time, there were more bike share systems in France, like per capita, than anywhere else in the world. And so I was really interested in like, what can we learn from this to bring this to the United States? And I was living in Paris, and I had a Pass Navigo because I would combine using like bikes and transit to get around Paris. And my Pass Navigo, literally just my plastic, transit card, I could attach my bike share membership to it. So I was able to just literally like tap it at the reader and pull out my bike share bike and ride around. And I was like, this is amazing. This is the epitome of seamlessness, right? I have my monthly pass that lets me get around everywhere on the transit system, and then I just tap it, boop, at the bike share system, and off I go. I don't even have to think about this. This is incredible. Why don't we have this in the Bay Area? And that led me down this incredible rabbit hole, or this just like path of like learning about transit fares and transit fare payments, which you can read about more at length if you read that Spur report, or at another time, I'd be happy to tell you more about that over a beer. But where it basically, like, it was just so easy elsewhere, and it felt so hard here. And so that was like this major inspiration for me. And like, then writing that report and then nothing happening. And then a couple years later, connecting with Ian Griffiths and Adina Levin and being like, we need to make something happen. And that was the start of Seamless Bay Area. What I will say is that in this whole journey, and what I've been learning about how functioning regional transit systems work, that have, say, a network manager, is that they often really do figure out how to negotiate these conflicts of local versus regional, right? I would just say that like the what you just mentioned a second ago, Dylan, about like when those two things are in conflict with one another, I would say that from a user perspective, there are very few people who like really understand that the RER is funded out of like a totally different mechanism than like the metro in Paris, right? Like it's just because it's just not, those seams, like you don't feel it, you don't trip over it. And so like you trust the leadership to sort of figure out how to deal with those conflicts when it happens. That's a big reason why you have a regional network manager, like an actual entity to help create and support those different trade-offs. I think that we could do that here in the Bay Area. I don't see a reason why we can't do that. There's lots of examples of that working very well around the world. So I would love it if we could go in that direction. Of course, that's not a change that you would make overnight, but like I think it's all very attainable if we wanted to push for it.
Thanks. And I will pass it over to Josie with some questions from Walk San Francisco.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Josie Dominguez-Chand, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Walk San Francisco. And our first question for you is, one second. Okay, here we go. What do you think the city should do to help more people feel safe, comfortable, and joyful while walking in San Francisco?
Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. So, well, gosh, for starters, we should finish by doing quick builds and intersection improvements at the entire high injury network that exists in the city, right? So the high injury network is like what, the 12 or 13% of streets that cause something like over 2/3 of injuries and fatalities in the city. So we could, let's finish that like right away. And then I would say, let's make sure that we have a commitment to like continuing to revisit those streets and those intersections as the model gets improved and updated. So the high injury network model gets improved, I think updated something like every 3 to 4 years. So we just need a continuous commitment from the city to continue focusing on quick builds and intersection improvements on that network as the model like grows and changes over time. I think that would be pretty huge if we could actually achieve that. I would also add that if we look at other places around even our own country where they've had a better chance, or excuse me, when they've done better at reducing traffic violence, I'm thinking of Boston, Massachusetts, or Hoboken, New Jersey, right? They have this pretty significant commitment to these not terribly sexy traffic calming interventions that are actually very effective. So like daylighting, and daylighting like you mean it across the city, traffic humps, not like just on a requested basis, but like on a proactive basis. Let's get like speed tables and school streets around every elementary school in San Francisco, right? Like these kinds of things we don't need to wait for somebody to request it, which is currently the main way that our traffic calming program functions. We can very proactively go out and do them, which is what Boston's been doing. And I would love it if San Francisco could adopt that as well. Ooh, joyful. Sorry, I wanted to touch on joyful. Joy, I'm all about joy. I live on a slow street and I absolutely love it. So I think creating those kinds of spaces, like that's so important, right? Like that's so important, is to like have spaces that people can have some ownership of, right? Actually like steward. On my slow street, we last weekend we put we took the soft hit posts and we decorated them with reflective tape to make them look like candy canes and Hanukkah candles. Absolutely adorable. You should totally see it. Like that's so great. That's so great, right? And you only get that when you actually have like ownership of the space. So I think that like I want to see like more neighborhoods feel that kind of ownership about their streets and like decorate it, create places for people to meet, have running clubs that go up and down our slow streets, have parties, right? Like this is the kind of stuff that makes San Francisco fun, and I want to do more of it.
Great. I love your enthusiasm for that too. And our next question is, as of December 2024, the city has not adopted a new updated Vision Zero policy. As a SFMTA board member, what are your thoughts?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, we need to make our streets and our buses safe and feel safe, which aren't always the same things, which I'll just state for the record. But like there's no reason why people should be critically injured or die crossing the street, waiting at bus stops. Like, this is a mistake, right? We've accepted a level of danger that is too high. And I think that the Vision Zero movement is fantastic for drawing attention to that and being like, no, we don't have to live this way. We can take control of our streets and we can make investments in our streets such that they are actually safe. I think what we need is a commitment from the city for how to do that in a researched and prioritized way. I think there's no reason why that shouldn't be the next iteration of Vision Zero or a Vision Zero policy, but I would want the city staff to demonstrate how we can not just build out our high injury network, but actually like improve our predictive modeling such that we can identify the characteristics of streets where we need to proactively make these street improvements, such as like what I mentioned previously about daylighting and speed tables and traffic humps, like very aggressively. But I would want to see from staff a policy that shows how they're going to like address those major weaknesses in our streets network in a evidence-based way.
Great. Thank you for your answers and your thoughts. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Dylan.
Thanks, Josie and Sarah. So we're now going to open up the questions from the audience. So just as an overview, you can submit your questions by sending a message in the chat to the user named questions. And then Rianne will work behind the scenes to elevate as many questions as possible to all of us hosts. If your name isn't obvious from your handle on Zoom, please include that with your question. And if you represent an organization or are a member of either of the three co-hosts organizations here today, please feel free to mention that in your question as well. So we'll be working to prioritize questions that address issues within the scope of SFMTA board members, including questions that address policy oversight, values and priorities, and process. So again, try to either explain or avoid any specialized jargon. We'll prioritize questions that are likely going to be interesting to the whole audience, or we might work with you to reword any highly specific questions to also include values and approach more broadly. So please get your questions in to that questions account, and I will pass it on to Claire for the first audience question, I believe.
Great. Thank you, Dylan. Okay, we're going to start with a really timely question from Leanne, who is a member of all three of our organizations. With Jeff Tumlin resigning, what will you prioritize in the search for a new SFMTA director?
Well, I think my top priorities as a board member would, frankly, I'd want to see an executive director who also really is like really concerned about that as well. So and just to reiterate, like funding the agency and in particular funding transit, right? So having somebody who has a clear idea about how they're going to do that and also manage to keep the buses going out on time every day and working with our labor unions, that is really important, right? So like not only understanding that they need to figure out how to fund this, but also to keep things working and keep things smooth. Transit's been working incredibly well for the past few years, which is like amazing, right? People like Muni more now than they have in a long time. And our ridership is doing really, really well relative to other American cities in a post-COVID era. So I think like we want more of that, and we want that person also to have a clear sense of how they're going to fund it. Then second is, of course, like people have to be safe. People have to be safe, right? Like I like the West Portal tragedy that a whole family waiting at a bus stop died, right? That is terrible. That is terrible in terms of what it says for about our city and what we've normalized, but also what it says to the rest of the world when you come and use transit in San Francisco. Or like a 4-year-old in a crosswalk died crossing at in front of one of our largest transit hubs. Also, just like truly tragic. We cannot continue to let this, or we cannot let this continue. And I would hope that an executive director would also recognize that and prioritize wanting to address our street safety crisis. And then I think 3, and this is again last but not least, but building trust with diverse communities. There are many neighborhoods that do not trust Muni. There are many neighborhoods that do not trust Muni because of past like planning projects, but also because of just feeling like Muni doesn't deliver. I think a lot of the people, and I'm thinking about my neighborhood and like the support that we have for my slow street, there's a lot of frustration with SFMTA because they feel like the slow street isn't slow. And the fact that that's continued for 2 years, that really does a lot to erode confidence. So there's a lot of feelings of, there's a lot of, I would say, there's a lot of distrust coming from a bunch of different places. And being able to speak to that, especially when like we need to try new things. We need to move in a more agile way and move more nimbly. Like our climate crisis, our economic crisis, like we need to try new things. And if you cannot try anything because fundamentally the people you serve don't believe that you'll be effective, that's a huge problem. So yeah, I would say I would really want an executive director who can speak to and has plans for and has demonstrated efficacy with those 3 priorities that I said at the top.
Thank you for your answer, Sarah. I'm going to throw it over to Dylan now.
Thanks. Yeah. So this question comes from Cyrus, who's a member of all 3 organizations. The question is, let's see. Parking is one of the most undervalued services the city provides, yet pricing it at market value is opposed across the political spectrum. Pricing parking appropriately would make it clear to drivers that they are using valuable resources and help us fund transit and sustainable mode shift. What would you do on the board to help bridge the gap between good policy and where small business owners and many voters are at?
Yeah, absolutely. So I loved The High Cost of Free Parking, which I read when I was in graduate school and would recommend it to anybody here if they haven't. Also, the new book from, what was it, Henry Grabar, A Paved Paradise, also a history of parking in the United States, highly recommended. So just would like to say I appreciate how underutilized parking is, how underpriced, I think is what I want to say, parking is in San Francisco. I think the trick though, and I think we learned this a little bit the hard way through SF Park, is like you can make rational arguments about why we need to switch to a new paradigm when it comes to parking. But if we don't get the buy-in from the community that would be supported by it, you can very easily sort of entrench the status quo. So I think we need to think about parking less as a like, let's get to the rational policy, which we need to do, but more as a behavioral change. Like, how can we change the behavior without creating a giant backlash kind of problem? And so the way that I think that I've seen effective techniques there in the transportation world is to do one of two things, or maybe both. One is that when you get the community in the form of a community benefit district invested in pricing parking, often because they have some, like they tend to reap some reward from it, that is a really good way to start getting businesses in particular invested in making changes, right? So like if they are going to be able to get some share of the funds from the new parking rates or prioritize certain projects in their area that they want to see done, that really changes the reaction to changing parking rates. Then the second thing is, and I think I saw this technique employed pretty well when I was in the Ocean Avenue Mobility Task Force. So supervisors Melgar and Safai convened a task force basically to prioritize a bunch of Prop K funds against many different plans that sought to solve the problem of Ocean Avenue in San Francisco. And the way that that worked was we were on a time-bound committee. It only lasted for about a year. And we had a facilitator. And the facilitator kind of like helped us, like a group of people coming from very different backgrounds, kind of figure out how we want to prioritize these like projects that came from like maybe 5 discrete plans for the corridor. And we were actually able to work through it pretty well, I have to say. Like I was pretty pleased with the outcome of that exercise. Wasn't perfect. I didn't get everything I wanted, but I felt really good about where we ended. And I also felt like I actually got to talk to other members of, District 7 and District 11 about these corridors and what works and what doesn't, and kind of like really wrestle with some of these issues in a way that I haven't gotten to do in any other kind of discourse. And I'd like to think that if we were able to do that, like have those kind of like focused, time-bound committees of like people from different walks of life who are truly committed to like not like solving the problem and not just undermining it, I think that we might be actually able to get to a place where we can change the status quo around parking and maybe a bunch of other different transportation problems. Well, then I have to cough. Sorry, talking a lot.
Yeah, no worry. Is that it there? I think that's
I'm just yeah. So I'll just to conclude, like we do need to fix how we price parking. I agree with that. We don't price it effectively. I'm not terribly sure that it is the revenue generation tool we want it, like we all desperately would want it to be as people who want to fund transit service. It probably could be better, but I'm not sure that it is like a silver bullet by any stretch. But we do need to price it better, if only to create more opportunity for people that like to like have better access to the curb and to use our curb more rationally, right? We need to be able to touch the curb and make changes to it. And that means you have to deal with pricing. So I think I'm very much a supporter of like trying to do a better job. We have to think about this as like a behavioral change problem and how we get buy-in to solving that problem, as opposed to just like trying to get to like trying to pass a more rational approach, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I'll pass it on to Josie for the next question.
Okay. This question comes from Matt, and it's a two-part question. So the first part is, having lived in Paris, what do you know about how Paris has dramatically increased biking in the central city over the past decade? And how can we adopt some of their strategies?
Yeah. Oh man, I love the opportunity to talk about Paris. This will be fun. So I lived in Paris from 2012 to 2013, which was before the era of Anne Hidalgo, but actually still when they were making some pretty significant changes. And so if you look at, like, there's a couple of really important things to understand about the city of Paris. So the city of Paris is teeny tiny. It's half the size of San Francisco. It's like 22, 23 square miles. And I think it's triple the density. So there's a lot of people who live there, who get around, and they don't have cars as like a baseline, right? I think that the car ownership rate when I lived there, gosh, it was certainly below 50%, but I can't remember specifically the number any longer. And most people who were Parisians who lived in Paris primarily relied on walking or the metro or bus to get around. So like that is from the start, like a population that's, I would say, just very used to shared modes and very used to like getting around without the need of an automobile. That's a very different kind of place to change than, say, someplace that's heavily car dependent. So I just wanted to state that right at the top. Like there's some similarities, and there's certainly some things we can learn from that San Francisco can learn from Paris, but like the baseline kind of densities and also investment in transit, right? They have all this extensive transit system in the form of their metro system and the bus system. Like it's so intense. It is a genuinely like different in that regard. Now, that said, what can we learn from it? Well, bike share, so Vélib in the mid 2000s really was a major catalyst. So the city of Paris started to see a pretty significant increase in just the number of people riding around on, frankly, the limited like bicycle facilities that existed in like 2008, 2009, right? But if you looked at the charts of like people getting around the city or choosing to opt into bikes, that was a larger than linear increase with respect to just the sheer like amount of bicycle facilities that they had built. So bike share in the mid-aughts in Paris, pretty significant catalyst. Another one was closing down the expressways along the Seine. So they really took some car-dependent infrastructure and they turned it into spaces for people, and they activated it pretty effectively. So you walk along like those, like the quays along the Seine, and there's businesses there, right? Like there's you can go out to eat in a boat parked along the Seine, or you can go to like a little pop-up, right? Like it's not just like a space that's preserved for people that formerly was for cars. It's actually like an area that they've allowed for commerce. And I think that that's something that's really important that we need to like keep in mind, that people, when they're out like having fun, often like to buy things, especially food. And so like, and then that creates this like good feedback loop of eyes on the street. So that was a pretty major factor. And then I would say they were trying some interesting stuff, although I'm not sure that it would rise to the level of that we would all like in terms of NACTO sanctioned bicycle infrastructure, but they were trying things like contraflow bike access on one-way streets, or for example, when there was a T intersection and you as somebody who was riding a bike was going through the intersection without like coming into a conflict point with a car, you didn't have to stop. You could just yield at that red light there. Like they were trying a lot of creative and interesting things to improve bicycle access, even before they started making a major investment in bicycle infrastructure. So all of these things are the kinds of things that I think we could consider or we should like learn from, because it certainly has proved like extremely useful in getting a return on people bicycling through the city. So a major investment in bike share, significant investment in spaces that are, dedicated to people first, especially if they're activated, and then also like trying some creative things with creating priority for people biking in particular on places that they usually don't have access to. I think it's easy. I think it's easy to like say like, oh my gosh, like Anne Hidalgo, like incredible. Look at that amazing plan, like bike plan. I would hope that there's a world in which we can like, between our Muni and BART and bike facilities and like how we get around San Francisco, that we could get to kind of a multimodal version of that as well. But I urge everyone that like they were starting from a different place than we are, which is really hard. So like we can learn from things that, especially tech strategies that have worked well in Paris, but I'm not sure that we can completely emulate it.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. I love Paris. It's our sister city. I was just there and I was walking along, and what you were saying, I'm like, yes, I felt that. So thank you so much for all of that. And now I'm going to pass it to Claire.
Thank you. Did I mute myself? No, I'm unmuted. I've never been in Paris, but I kind of feel like I got a glimpse of it just listening to you talk just now, Sarah. So maybe I gotta go see it sometime in my future. Okay, the next question is from Cyrus again, who is a member of all of the organizations. The question is, small businesses often oppose transit and cycling projects as they see street changes that impact parking as either negative sum or zero sum. How can the board be a part of solving this misalignment between small businesses and sustainable transportation transition?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some room for improvement with how San Francisco, with how MTA works with small businesses. So I'm gonna do another little tangent for you all. So when I was in graduate school, we did a project. We had a required class, which was like an urban planning studio, and usually what it was somebody from a local city would come in and say like, we have this problem, like you all like up and coming planners, how can we solve it? Like what can we study? How can we like frame a question that can help us like solve this problem? Okay. And the problem that I got in the fall of 2014 was how on earth can we break this log jam around Telegraph Avenue in Oakland? So like the year before, staff had proposed a protected bike lane along the length of Telegraph Avenue in Oakland, especially through Temescal, which is a really, adorable, walkable neighborhood, lots of small businesses. And the reaction from the community, or especially I should say from the business owners, was like, no way, you're going to kill our businesses. We can't possibly have this. And so Jamie Parks, who then went on to work at MTA, but now like is back to working at the Department of Transportation in Oakland, he came to our studio and was like, how do people like, how do we do this? How do we break this? And what I ended up doing was I ran an intercept survey for shoppers. So we actually went and we talked to 900 people, and I kid you not, we surveyed 900 people about how, this was a short survey, but like how they got there, right? Like where they were coming from, what their transportation modes, where they were going, how much they spent, right? We did this pretty extensive survey. And the outcome, and we did this other thing at the same time, which was we did an employer survey. We asked a similar set of questions to employers, like, how do you think your shoppers get to your store, and how do you get to work, and how do your employees get to work, and right? So like kind of we wanted to see like both of the outcomes. And the vast majority of like managers and business owners believed that everybody was coming to their store by a car. Okay. That was what the employer or employee survey found. And what our shopper survey staff found, I know this isn't like a Q&A part, so I'll just answer the question, but what they found was that actually it was not nearly that simple. And that it was like really, truly a mix. And like a third of people were just walking to the neighborhood on foot. Like a third of people were either like taking the bus or riding a bicycle. And then the last third were coming to in a car, either like with other people or on their own, roughly speaking. Okay. And so it was way more complicated, and it really varied even more, right? So if you were going to Pizzaiolo, or if you were going to the Bake Sale Betty's, actually chances were you were going to walk. You were not going to drive a car to go to like that neighborhood serving retail. If you were going to go to the paint store, chances were you were going to drive. So this was like, like basically all of the people who owned businesses had this understanding that everybody was coming to their store by a car. And if you did anything to remove any of that parking, that would inherently undermine them. But when we started to take this around and actually say, Pizzaiolo, you might benefit from a road diet. Like you might do better. Most of your people are coming to your pizza shop from walking around. Like they took that seriously, right? I mean, they took that really seriously. I think the reason why I went into this is like, we need to do that kind of research. Like we need to work with the merchants to actually properly understand, like whenever you're talking about a street project, like what's the baseline conditions? Because honestly, I can totally understand why these business owners, they're not transportation professionals. They like will have some sense of how people are getting there. And then like they have to run a small business. That's hard. Like I get that they're not necessarily paying attention to like those kinds of questions. So I think getting support and like doing like actually like a rigorous job figuring out what stands to change whenever you want to do some kind of project, that really could like help actually build support for doing a project. And I think this was one other like little story is for Valencia, which I think most of us know was such a challenge in many different ways. One thing that Friends of Valencia did with support from KidSafe SF was actually to hire Gale, the urban planning and architecture firm, to do a visioning study that included not only people who lived along the corridor, but also the merchants. And this was happening kind of in the background earlier this year. But the effect of that was that we actually got a lot of support from VCMA to sort of just see like, oh yeah, we need to do something different, right? We need to, maybe we should be thinking about this differently, because like their customers want something different. Now I was probably a little bit too late just in terms of the politics of that corridor project. But I think that if we could actually try to, provide a benefit to these small businesses to understand how their customers get there, and then craft a solution that helps us both meet our goals around mode shift, but also their goals around getting customers, I think we could have many more win-wins that way.
Thank you for that super robust answer, Sarah. I think the MTA would really benefit from hearing those ideas. All right.
I like that. Just read my tag phrase, Sara Barz, super robust answers.
Yeah. Dylan, back to you.
Thank you, Claire. This next question also references Valencia. This is a question from Matt, who is a board member at Bike Coalition. Matt says, the biking and rolling plan and its implementation is very important, but we also need a plan for transit routes, pedestrian-friendly streets, car travel, and they should all be integrated with one another. how can SFMTA do more coherent planning and implementation? An example of a location-specific outcome could be designating and supporting Guerrero as a car route, Valencia as a biking pedestrian corridor, and Mission as a transit street with some mixed uses where safe.
Sure. So okay, so for transportation, right? In theory, we do this thing called the transportation element whenever we do a general plan update, right? So like you have a general plan, this is basically the blueprint for how you want your city to grow. You adopt that like every 20 to 30 years. We just did a mini version of that with our housing element, which we passed, I think just maybe 14 months ago now, I think roughly, right? But we haven't done a transportation plan, or sorry, we haven't done a transportation element. So you do an update to your housing element, and you're doing the housing policies for where you want like more housing to go, and which in our case, like we have to, right? The state told us that you have to find room for 82,000 housing units. So like we did our update to the housing element. We've focused on like where we're gonna upzone, like where we want new development to go. This is not a conversation about whether or not that is reasonable. Let's just leave all of that to side. We have that, right? That work has largely been done. But we haven't done the transportation piece. And I think that's a huge mistake. You need you're gonna create a whole bunch of new housing. Well, you need to look at your transportation infrastructure. Like, especially I think this is going to be very important on the west side, right? We want to put a lot of our new housing on the west side. Well, that probably means we need to update and take a second look at our infrastructure, which we should be thinking about in a multimodal way, and not just like, focusing on the bike plan or focusing on like this particular corridor, right? We should need to take a broader view. This is why we have transportation elements as a concept, but we haven't done it. So I would really love it if staff could prioritize doing some of that work. And I think it would be very refreshing. We haven't had an update to the transportation element since the late 90s, I believe. So this is like things have changed since then. I think it's a great opportunity, and it actually could lead us to, some creative ideas about how people can get around in San Francisco in a multimodal way.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And before I pass it off to Josie again, just a reminder to get your questions in chat to all of our folks in the audience. This is your chance to submit an audience-submitted question. And yeah, could use some more. So feel free to send them to questions, the user questions in the chat, if you have any questions for Sarah. Thanks, Josie. Over to you.
Okay, our next question comes from Susan, who represents Bike, Walk, and the San Francisco Transit Riders. And the question is, what are your thoughts on the current recommendations for the 33 speed cameras in San Francisco?
You know what? I'm very excited that we have speed cameras coming in. I'm very excited that we have concrete plans to install them. I have to admit that I don't have a particularly informed opinion about those locations and if it's happening slowly or not. So this is something that I'd love to learn more about. But at this very moment, besides being supportive of speed cameras and, fingers crossed that it works well for us and it actually works to reduce speeding, which is a huge priority of mine, I don't have a particularly informed view about how the program itself is being implemented right now.
Okay, thank you for that response. And it's back to you, Claire.
Josie, you're killing it with these intro, extra question reading. You're like a news reporter with the headphone and the blazer. Okay. Okay, I have another question from Cyrus that is also kind of similar to a question that Parker asked us. So we merged the two. The question is, the SFMTA board is often presented with projects that have been watered down by the San Francisco Fire Department, and yet the fire department does not attend SFMTA board meetings, is allowed to oppose safer streets silently. Would you be willing to request the fire department to attend any board hearings where they have neutered projects before they are presented, such that they can answer questions and be accountable to the public?
Ooh, that's a spicy one.
Spicy.
Yeah. So, but actually, I don't really think that it needs to be. Like, the fire department is so clearly a stakeholder in so many of our streets projects. It does feel like sometimes they're in a position to make these decisions without like hearing the discourse. In fact, like if I were to be appointed to the SFMTA board, I'd actually really love to go build relationships with the fire commission, and frankly go sit in on some of their meetings and hear what the discourse is like over there. Like I think that we need like siloed decision making, which is sometimes it feels like what's happening a little bit when you get to like be like, hello, fire department, can we make this change? Is that okay? And then they take it off and they think about it and they come back, and like that doesn't usually help anybody. So I think that we need to have much more open lines of communication between these two city agencies. There are commissions that guide both of them, right? I think that the board could help by helping to build those relationships between those two agencies. I also think, I think it's a very reasonable thing to ask. It would be a request, right? It would be a request, not like a demand, unless the mayor stepped in. But I think it'd be a very reasonable thing to request that the fire department come and help present on trade-offs with a specific project, or even just hear the discourse around a particular project from the board and from the public commenters. Yeah, I think it would be a totally reasonable thing to request.
Thank you, Sarah. And now I'm gonna pass it back to Dylan.
Thanks. So this is another question from Matt. What do you see as the role of safe routes to school in making biking, walking, and transit in our city safer and easier? And I guess I'll also add to that, like, what are your priorities for the SFMTA, especially around how it serves youth and students?
Sure. Well, so my priorities for the SFMTA as it pertains to students are no different than my priorities for the SFMTA if I were to be appointed. So I just want to be like really clear about that, because students also rely on MTA, and so they need a functioning and funded transit system. They also need it to be safe, right? Like that's fundamental, like everybody does. And I think in particular and I've heard this from a couple of parents with whom I've been talking to recently, that they don't necessarily feel comfortable with their kids riding the bus without them, because they don't feel like their kids don't feel safe, or they don't feel safe about their kids riding the bus. So I think that feeling of safety on the bus matters even more for kids. And then of course, like trust, like if you can't make a change or do a project because the city, like the neighborhood in question doesn't believe that you'll be able to do it, that's a huge problem according to like for everybody. But schools, I think transportation for schools is such an opportunity area. And so I'm currently on the SFCTA Citizens Advisory Committee. And we got one of the SFCTA planners did a plan on trying to make transportation improvements for school-aged kids who have to travel, I think like it was over 2 miles essentially. And it was a pretty extensive planning study. I think it took about 18 months, and there were a couple of rounds of outreach. And I personally found the outcomes to be really underwhelming. They were like, hire a transportation coordinator at SFUSD. And I can appreciate that that's why it ended, like that's where it landed. But I feel like that kind of planning study, it doesn't, in my view, it didn't really attempt to wrestle with the real problems that many of our families face getting kids to school. And considering how deterministic the school trip is, right? If you have to get 2 kids to 2 different schools in the morning, right? You like, unless you have really organized your life in such a way that those schools are very close to one another, or you like frankly are willing to do Herculean efforts on transit, we don't provide very effective ways for parents to do the kind of school ferrying that needs to happen for parents, in my opinion. So I think that considering how important it is for kids to get to school on time and be safe doing it, this is a huge area of opportunity that we should be working on, and frankly that I would really love to see our planning team focus on if they were to do something like a transportation element update. And I think a couple of the interesting challenges that are presented there are, like, for example, at SFUSD, your kids can't walk to school themselves until usually about 4th grade. They can't leave schools on their own, right? Until they've had until I think it's roughly until 4th grade, certainly not younger. So even so, my son, who lives a block and a half from the nearest elementary school, couldn't walk himself to school by policy. But what if we could create a school-sanctioned walking bus that all the kids who live on Hearst Avenue, who go to Sunnyside Elementary, could just officially sign in to their official walking bus and go to school? I think that something like that, I think those kinds of approaches could actually really help families, and then free up both mental and also physical resources in the morning. So I would really love to see our very smart planners really engage with those kinds of problems in a new way, and engage with working with SFUSD about their pickup and drop off policies, to see, again, to see if we can find some more win-wins for families.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that. And yeah, I'll shout out the Safe Routes to School program. I know a lot of the folks working on that, making some of those walking school buses and activities like that a reality. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that we would love to see expanded to more schools in more parts of the city. And I think it's Josie's turn now.
Thank you. And I'm glad we're talking about the youth in this meeting today. So that was really great to hear that question. So the question that I have, it's anonymous, and it is, what is your perspective on autonomous vehicles and their role on our streets?
What is my perspective? Well, for starters, I have taken a Waymo. I think I've taken it once or twice. I was very just interested to try it. I think one of the things that I liked about that experience was that I felt like the Waymo was so much more conservative and safe than, say, probably the equivalent Lyft driver. And frankly, this is funny, I'll just offer, my husband and I were motivated to try it because we were walking, I think we were walking to I think it must have been the War Memorial Opera House. I think we were walking along Franklin Street. We were walking to the War Memorial Opera House. And, especially right before a big event like the ballet or the opera, there's just it's chaos right around that corner of those performing arts venues, just people, just cars trying to turn right and left and get around the throngs of people walking to the symphony and the opera house. And it's really stressful. And this particular night we were walking towards the opera house, and I noticed that there was just this really long line of cars. And then we got to the crosswalk and there was a Waymo very patiently sitting there and waiting for everybody to like rightfully walk across the crosswalk and not like try to infringe on or like run over anybody. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's great. I love that. I'm going to try it. Now, that said, I don't think Waymo, like, there's no world in which Waymo replaces Muni, right? Like, in my view, like, I was impressed with its approach to safety, but like, it is totally like an ad hoc kind of solution for a dense urban area, right? Like, Waymo, like any kind of, I mean, this is just true. Like having a lot of cars in a dense urban area like San Francisco is going to lead to congestion and more angry driving. Like it's a negative feedback loop. What I like about the Waymos, and I really think this is very fair, and the opponents of robo-taxis don't give them enough credit, is that they are a heck of a lot more conservative and less threatening to people on the street than their human counterparts. So there's definitely pluses to them, but are they like a solution for San Francisco's transportation problems? Absolutely not. And I do think that this is, it's those one of those kinds of things that I think that there's an opportunity to regulate, right? I'm a parent. I don't like it when my kid gets soda. It's very bad for his teeth. Like, I think that soda taxes are very useful. It's a disincentive for that kind of consumption. Does that mean that we should eliminate soda? No, I don't think so. I think that sometimes that's a treat that serves us well. But like, we can regulate it, we can manage it. And I think ideally we can do that with this technology too, right? Like it can serve a place in our transportation ecosystem. Does it stand to replace Muni? Absolutely not. I think that we can't, and I've heard rumors to that effect, and I just don't think that that's realistic.
Okay, Waymo, very mindful, very demure. That's what I'm taking from this. And thank you, Claire. I do have a broadcasting background, so I'm glad it's here tonight, and it's back to you.
I'm eating this up right now, Cozy. Okay. It seems like I get the honor of giving you the last question. And it is a question from myself that is really from the first question that I asked you. And it's about slow streets, which it's very clear to us how much you love slow streets, especially Slowhurst. So currently, I think we have about the same amount of slow streets that we started the program with, and most of them are not meeting desired metrics. If you become a director, how will you support the program's expansion? For example, I'm thinking of the South of Market, and I'm remembering that one SFMTA hearing where all of those like Filipino seniors came to give public comment about how much they wanted slow streets. So how will you support the program's expansion, and what needs to happen on the existing slow streets for them to actually be meeting metrics? And as it pertains to your role as a director, how will you get staff to do that?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Claire. So I support what the People's Slow Streets Coalition asked for when the People's Slow Streets Coalition organized in order to make sure that the Slow Streets program even became permanent, right? Like just 2 years ago, it was not a done deal. We were going to have a Slow Streets program. There was a lot of talk, like, in the summer of 2022 about dismantling it, calling it neighborways. Like, there was just a tremendous amount of existential dread about whether or not we would even have a Slow Streets program not that long ago. So, like, what I think we should do is meaningfully create a way for new slow streets to enter the program that doesn't just rely on, say, a bike plan update, which is the approach that the MTA board has taken today. I think that slow streets, like, I think there should be an application process. I think there should be a way, like a rubric with which to consider what kinds of slow streets, or excuse me, what kinds of streets could be eligible and considered, where they are successful, where not. Like, I think that's what the People's Slow Streets Coalition called for about 2 years ago. We didn't get it. We didn't quite get a way to enter new slow streets in this new biking and rolling plan. I would like to see that still. I think that in terms of holding the agency accountable, I mean, this is why, like, it was important that the board help set the standards for like vehicle volume and vehicle speeds on slow streets. So like, I definitely think this is a role the board could play to like go back to staff and say, hey, it's 2 years and these streets are out of compliance. So what are we doing? Right? Like I think that is exactly the role that the SFMTA board needs to take. And I would be very happy to help do that. And I think I do just want to emphasize, like, the metrics in question are not crazy. They're very reasonable. And also, like, I think if we can get beyond like the culture wars around transportation, there's so much support for having quieter residential neighborhoods, right? Like, that is something, and I know that intimately because I have knocked on so many doors in my neighborhood. I know that there's so much support, even from people who do not ever see themselves riding a bike or walking in the middle of the street, but that they want, that they like these spaces that are flexible and that support community, and that's really important to them. And B, they don't want their streets to be a thoroughfare, right? They want a calmer residential neighborhood. That is something that's like a really widely held view across much of the city. So I think we can channel that. And I think that like these metrics help deliver that experience. So which is to say we need the accountability piece, and we need that to come across a little stronger. And I think that is actually the role of the board to help play with these streets. And the very last thing that I'll say about this is I think I love slow streets. I live on one. I think very highly of it. I also think that we should be thinking about things like low traffic neighborhoods. Like, I'm not sure we need to limit ourselves to a particular street. I know that we did that during COVID for a reason. It was like simple. It was a simple concept for people to wrap their heads around. But if you look in London, for example, low traffic neighborhoods are something that's actually really popular because it doesn't just focus on one street, right? You do traffic calming throughout a neighborhood so that you're not pitting one street against one another. I think there would be a lot of support for programs like that as well. So I would just like to add, like, yes, it's about like creating a path in so neighbors can advocate for like creating these kinds of experiences on their own street, but also it's about accountability. We need that from the board, and creating like maybe a slightly broader definition of the program.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was so lovely talking to you and getting to hear your answers on so many of these really great questions. Josie, I think I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, everyone. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us for this meet and greet nominee event. And for those in the audience who are interested in the next steps. So Sarah's nomination has already been moved through the first legislative hurdle and is going to the full Board of Supervisors tomorrow, where she needs to be approved by a majority of the full board. Sarah has shared that at this point, the best way to show your support for her appointment is to write your supervisor in the next hour to let them know you'd like to see her approved. Thank you to Walk San Francisco, San Francisco Transit Riders, and the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition for teaming up to co-host this event. If you aren't yet a member of these 3 organizations, please consider supporting our work so we can keep hosting events like this and advocating for better transportation here in the city. Finally, thank you to all of you who joined us tonight, or if you're watching this recording later. We can't do any of this work without your support.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Have a good evening.